And so I want to get started so that we can actually hear from all of our special guests. Did we lose Mayor Pete? Okay, wonderful. Good evening, everyone. We want to thank you for joining our call this evening with Governor Howard Dean, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is running for the U.S. Senate in Georgia in the special election. I'd like to just thank everyone for joining this event and for supporting this event. And what we'd like to do is give an opportunity for each of our special guests to thank you for coming and to sort of speak a little bit about why they are supporting Reverend Warnock. And then from there, we will take a few questions that I've received from a number of you in the last 48 hours. And so with that, Governor Dean, I welcome you to the stage, the proverbial stage. Take it away, sir.
Well, I'll be very short because while Pete and I have just both run for president, he actually won the Iowa caucuses and I did not, although I did win Vermont in a race in a write-in campaign on my way out the door. So I'll be quick here so we can get on to the two stars of the show and the big star of the show. Reverend Warnock is a great candidate. I am his, I'll just be, I'll spare saying all these wonderful things about him because you already know he's wonderful. You wouldn't be on the call. But I do want to tell you, this is a very winnable race. It is winnable for Raphael Warnock. It is winnable for John Ossoff, and it is winnable for Joe Biden. This is right now, this is a 1-point race nationally, a 1-point race. So this stuff really matters. That it matters that you're writing checks. It matters that that Reverend Warnock is up on the air. This is a winnable race. And so far, what Trump is doing is very dangerous for the country. So far, it's not working. This is, as somebody, one of the guests said in the smaller gathering beforehand, this is a page out of Nixon Agnew. It's plain racism. It's divisive, and the American people are not liking this yet, but they could, and it's going to get worse, and it's going to be an incredibly ugly race because the president is an incredibly ugly person surrounding himself by incredibly ugly people, who are fundamentally bad for the country. So I can't, I'm going to just defer to Pete here for a second, but I want to say it is a pleasure, Reverend, to be supporting somebody, not just who believes in all the right things, but somebody of your faith, because we need a little faith right now in what's going on in this country. And I think faith is what is going to overcome these very, very difficult times.
Mayor Pete.
Well, thanks. First of all, it's a real treat to be reunited with Governor Dean and campaigning together with him, and so proud to stand in this race with Reverend Warnock for several reasons. I too will be brief because he is such an incredible thinker and speaker, and I want everybody, for the most part, to be hearing in his own words the case for him to be a senator. But I just want to make sure everybody understands the extent to which all eyes are on Georgia, because this really is a hinge point in American history. Look, we know how bleak this is. We all know that the stakes have gone up dramatically, even since a few months ago when I was running for president, and we already knew then that the House was on fire. We have run out of ways to exaggerate or convey what's going on. We've run out of metaphors. We've run out of cliches. The kinds of things that we would use to describe other times in history or very different parts of the world are now what we see when we look at our own country. Difficulty controlling the spread of disease, backsliding in the question of whether we are a democracy at all, the onset of political violence. This is what things have come to. And while there is so much riding on making sure that we deliver a change in the White House, get Joe Biden elected. And by the way, that will be a very exciting thing to see happen in Georgia. The reality is so much depends on the U.S. Senate and making sure that we retake the Senate, something else we might not have thought would be possible at the beginning of this calendar year. But now, because of the extent to which the Senate GOP has turned into a bad faith organization at exactly the moment when Americans so need real leadership to confront the moral crisis of racial justice in this country, the economic crisis that is affecting so many, and of course the public health crisis, there is an opportunity for a political realignment in this country that is truly a once-in-a-lifetime moment. And the propulsion of that, I think, is a moral realignment. And that's one of the reasons why Reverend Warnock so meets this moment. He is someone who is crystal clear on the values that motivate him, values that are unapologetic, and yet something I think more and more people can have access to because of his hopeful and moral vocabulary about what's at stake. I see in him somebody who will be able to do that vitally important work of broadening the coalition of Americans ready for change and widening the circle of belonging of who gets to be counted as fully American. It's something I saw from the very first time I had the blessing of visiting his church during the course of our campaign, and something I think more and more Americans are seeing. If I may speak tactically for a moment, this is a classic example of a race where campaigning will matter and investment will matter enormously. The evidence is very clear that the more people learn about his candidacy, and by the way, the more people learn about his opponent, the incumbent, the better things look. But we've got a lot of work to do, and you are a part of that by generously agreeing to be part of this event. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm glad you're here. But I'm going to cut my remarks short right there because I really want you to hear from the man of the hour.
Reverend Warnock, I think you're unmuted.
Thank you so very much. And I'm incredibly grateful to Governor Howard Dean and to Mayor Pete Buttigieg for co-hosting this gathering. They are men for whom I have a great deal of respect and admiration. I've watched Governor Dean for years. I appreciate so much his public service. And Mayor Pete is a meteoric figure who has come into the American consciousness with such power, and we're grateful for his witness and for the ways in which he stood up in so many ways. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue my long years of advocacy and ministry and activism. And I'm running as a preacher, the pastor of Martin Luther King Jr.'s church, who wants to translate my activism and my years of agitation into legislation, because I understand the importance of public policy and the impact that that really makes. We are at an inflection point in the history of our country. We've been saying cycle after cycle that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. Well, that actually was true in 2016, as we have seen in tragic ways. And it is exceedingly true in 2020. This is a moment when we as Americans get a chance to stand up like other generations at other inflection points, and either go backwards or reclaim in this moment the hope and the promise of our democracy, the depth of our commitment of who we are as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. I believe in that promise. I'm firmly aware as a Black man of the ways in which we're still pushing towards it, but I believe in it. And I think in a real sense, my life is an embodiment of the American promise. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, one of 12 children. I'm the baby next to the baby. We call that the knee baby. I'm the first college graduate in my family. I often say that I went to Morehouse College on a full faith scholarship. The truth is, I really didn't know how I was going to pay for the first semester. I had some of the money, but not all of the money. And I went to Morehouse on faith. I had two incredible parents. We didn't have much money in my family. We were short on money, but we were long on hope, long on faith, long on humor, long on joy. And my parents, who are both preachers, passed that faith on to me. I don't know if any of you ever been to a Pentecostal church, but these are true believers. My mom used to speak to me sometimes, it seemed in King James English, "Thou shalt wash the dishes, lest I smite thee with my rod and my staff." They poured that faith into me. And my dad was not only a preacher, but he was a small businessman who used to load old cars that other folk had thrown away onto the back of an old rig that he engineered really himself, pulling it up on these cars on the back of this rig using pulleys. And he would basically draw what he was going to do on a piece of paper. He didn't have an engineering degree. I don't know how he did it. He took those cars down to Chatham Steel, and that's how he took care of his family. And then on Sunday mornings, he preached to people who themselves felt thrown away. And everything I've done as a pastor and as a public servant, I've seen life through the lens of my father and my mother. I went on, graduated from Morehouse, earned 3 more degrees, PhD degree, became pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church 15 years ago. I'm running because I recognize that it is harder now for kids growing up in struggling families, whether it be public housing in Savannah or Augusta or Atlanta or disaffected rural communities in northern Georgia. It's harder for kids in struggling families now than it was for me all of those years ago. 15 years ago this month, we all witnessed the horrors of Hurricane Katrina. I arrived as the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church 2 months on the heels of Katrina. Katrina, when we witnessed the natural disaster of a hurricane, compounded by the unnatural disasters of poverty and our ongoing struggle with racism as we watch folk in the lower Ninth Ward literally stuck in the Great Dome and then displaced to some 40 different states all across the country. And a lot of us, I'm sure people on this call dug in that moment to respond to the evacuees from Hurricane Katrina. I just arrived as the pastor of Ebenezer 2 months after that. And in the spring of that year, the spring of the following year, 2006, just a few months after Hurricane Katrina, the state of Louisiana had a municipal election. They were electing a new mayor in New Orleans and other offices. The problem was Katrina evacuees had lost everything. And the state of Louisiana said that if you want to vote, you live in New Orleans, that's fine, but you got to return physically to New Orleans. Almost no one was given the option to vote by mail, absentee voting. Similar kind of argument we're having right now in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. And so the irony of this moment was while we were making it difficult for people who had lost everything, or the state of Louisiana wasn't doing everything in my estimation to make sure that they could vote. The irony was at that same moment, we had an American president who was boasting about the fact that we had taken democracy back to Iraq. And I said to myself, if democracy is good for Iraq, shucks, we ought to try it in Louisiana. We ought to make voting easier for American citizens who were from Louisiana, displaced to some 40 different states. We couldn't stop that election. But I was the young pastor of Ebenezer 15 years ago, too young to be afraid. And so I just walked into my church one day and I announced that if people from New Orleans were living in Atlanta and they wanted to go back to New Orleans to vote, we were going to take them back. And somebody asked me, well, how are we going to do that? And I said, I don't know. We'll figure it out along the way. We raised the money. We organized something we call the Freedom Caravan. And one Friday night, we had a prayer service at my church. And then we loaded scores of Katrina evacuees on the buses. We took some election lawyers with us in case they ran into problems. And we drove 8 hours through the night, landing in New Orleans on a Saturday morning. That part Louisiana got right. The election was on a Saturday. And then when we got there, even though there was debris and destruction and the remnants of destruction still in the streets, some roads still, unopened. They said, not only do you have to come to New Orleans if you want to vote, you got to go to your actual precincts. We're not going to create any unified precincts, make it easier by any stretch of the imagination. So we took the folks off of those buses, put them on school buses, and then delivered them to their actual precincts so that they could vote. And I was celebrating the fact that Ebenezer, unlike some historic churches, wasn't so caught up in living into what it had done years ago that it wasn't finding a way to be relevant in this moment. But we didn't get to celebrate long because soon thereafter we discovered that there would be a runoff. And so we had to organize Freedom Caravan 2 and do it again. That was 15 years ago. And ever since then, we found a way to stay into some good trouble. Ever since then, during my tenure at that church, I've been engaged not only in that instance and trying to give people their vote and therefore their voice. As chairman of the New Georgia Project, along with my friend Stacey Abrams, I've registered some 400,000 new voters in the state of Georgia. And we regularly register voters at my church. But not only have I stood up for voting rights, I've been standing up for healthcare and healthcare reform, because I believe that healthcare is a human right. And so when President Obama and his allies were trying to push through the Affordable Care Act, I was preaching about it from my pulpit. And I was insisting that Georgia should expand Medicaid. And when Georgia refused to expand Medicaid, and if you think about it, it was just sheer politics in the worst sense of the word. There's no good reason not to expand Medicaid. It isn't as if the people in Georgia were going to get a refund on their checks because we didn't expand Medicaid. Rather, we've just been subsidizing healthcare in other states that had the good sense to expand Medicaid. Since then, we've had some 9 rural hospitals in Georgia announce that they were going to close, that they're closing. These are hospitals that could have stayed open if they had paying customers, if we had expanded Medicaid. And so I stood up in that moment and I said, Georgia ought to expand Medicaid. And I and several other activists organized a sit-in in the governor's office. I was holding a sign while sitting there in the governor's office with a quote from Dr. King that said, of all the injustices, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And they hauled several dozens of us off to jail. I didn't mind. I thought that was a small price to pay for people who needed healthcare. And so we've been standing up for healthcare. And a few years later, when the Republicans were pushing forward in 2017, a $2 trillion tax cut to the riches of the rich and taking resources away from CHIP, the Children's Healthcare Program, I went to the United States Capitol and had another demonstration. And I was arrested in the rotunda of the United States Capitol, again, standing up for healthcare and standing up for an America that embraces all of us. I don't say that so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm the pastor of Dr. King's church. You can't be afraid of getting arrested every now and then if you're the pastor of Dr. King's church. But I say that because I'm hopeful that with your support, I can get escorted one more time by the Capitol Police, but this time not to central booking, but to my new office as the next United States Senator from the state of Georgia, where I can continue to fight for healthcare reform, fight for voting rights, fight for the dignity of work and the dignity of workers. I think it's a contradiction to call workers essential and to be unwilling to pay them an essential wage. So I've been fighting for voting rights, healthcare reform, been fighting for the dignity of workers. I've been standing up with members of the LGBTQ plus community as a faith leader and insisting that there's no such thing as equal rights for some. And I've been standing up with women saying that I believe unequivocally in a woman's right to choose. And when I've received pushback from other people who feel that theirs is the only perspective on the faith and that somehow God is a Republican, I've reminded them that if you really are committed to the dignity of human beings and their worth, why don't we fight together on some of the things that we might be able to agree on? The fact that the United States of America has an infant mortality rate that is far beyond that of its Western industrialized counterparts, that its maternal mortality rate is exceedingly high, and that Black women are 4 to 5 times more likely to die in childbirth or as a result of childbirth, even when their income and their insurance is the same. And so why don't we fight together on the things that government actually can make a difference on? And so I'm deeply honored by this opportunity to run. And I look forward to the next 65 days as we make our case before the people of Georgia. And I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Warnock. We want to jump to some of the questions that we received. We received a question from Eric Gruen. He's based in Berkeley, California. And he would like to know where you stand on the more progressive sort of ideals that have floated in the Democratic Party in the last couple of years. So like Medicare for all, the new Green Deal, free tuition, or debt forgiveness for higher education. We'd love to just get your thoughts on where you stand on some of those policy issues.
Here are the places where I'm going to lean in and try to lead as a United States Senator. In this moment, I am starting with healthcare. I believe that healthcare is a human right. I believe that the Affordable Care Act was an amazing achievement. And I think it's important that we don't forget how much was achieved through that act. It took 70 years to get there. And what we ought to do is strengthen the existing law. And we ought to find ways to get more people covered. I think the public option is a good way to get there. But right now I'm fighting against two opponents on the other side, Senator Kelly Loeffler and Republican Congressman Doug Collins, who, if it were left up to them, they'd get rid of the Affordable Care Act in the middle of a pandemic, which would leave 1.8 million Georgians with pre-existing conditions without any coverage at all. And so I think the people of Georgia need a United States Senator who will stand up, defend the Affordable Care Act, and work to strengthen that law. And that is my commitment and the work that I plan to do. In addition to that, I think it's time for us, even as we are trying to push our way through this pandemic, I think it's not too early for us to start asking ourselves as an American people, not simply how do we survive this pandemic, but how do we thrive? How do we thrive on the other side of this pandemic? I think we witnessed as we have had to respond to this emergency, yet another emergency. Through the CARES Act and the various forms of legislation, we've had to respond to the tune of trillions of dollars. And then during the Great Recession, we had to do the same thing. 9/11, understandably, we had to do the same thing. I think it's time for us to think about how we reinvest in America on the other side of this pandemic. How we put forward a bold infrastructure program. Trump has been talking about it, but he's not serious, clearly not serious about it. But we need to reinvest in roads, bridges, tunnels, infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure, but virtual infrastructure, broadband. A lot of we're learning in this moment how important mobility is, not just physically, but virtually. And so I would be among those pushing for the kind of reinvestment in America that would get our economy ready for the 21st century, so that the 21st century, like the 20th century, can also be the American century. And in the midst of all of that, we've got to stand up for the voice of ordinary people in the process. We've got to address the fact that corporate interests have an outsized impact on our politics. And as long as somebody other than the people own our politics, it doesn't matter whether your issue is climate change or reasonable gun reform. The reason why we can't get much movement on any of those issues, even when there's reasonable amount of consensus among the American people, why is it that we can't get any movement? We can't get any movement to the degree that somebody else owns our politics. And so we need reform around the outsized impact of money on our politics. And we need to address voter suppression, which is why we got to push to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And then we've got to go beyond that to address the outsized influence of corporations on our politics.
Thank you, Reverend. We received another question from Nicholas Combs from Leonardtown, Maryland. And his question is, what legislation can a Democratic Senate pass next year? And what can be done by civilians like myself to demand better methods of accountability for state and federal politicians to make sure that taxpayer money is being spent properly? And I think a lot of this is really stemming from, we've seen sort of the pandemic that's happening now, and the questions about what the CDC is saying, whether people trust a vaccine or not. whether our democratic institutions are actually serving the public. What would you do as a senator to make sure that these organizations and institutions are staying true to their purpose and not being corrupted?
I think we need more transparency about who's paying for people to be in office in the first place. The outsized influence of dark money in our politics is corrosive, and it encourages corruption. And we got to insist that that changes.
I want to stay true to the time that we have. What are the new ideas? This is from Danny Lee in Albuquerque, New Mexico. What are the new ideas we have to turn out voters, not only for you, but to also see voters turn out for Joe Biden, because Georgia is a battleground state? What is the campaign doing?
Oh, we're working hard every day. And we didn't just start working when I got in this race. I've been working first as the chairman of the New Georgia Project, where we've registered hundreds of thousands of new voters in this state. My good friend Stacey Abrams came within 55,000 votes of winning. That was no hocus pocus. That was no magic that happened overnight. That was hard work, hard fought over years. And we have been leaning in and registering people who represent together the kind of multiracial, multi-generational coalition that is the emerging American electorate. She came within 55,000 votes of winning, and that's after running against a man who was both the player on the field, he was her opponent, and he was the umpire. And he used all the powers of being the umpire, putting his thumb on the scale at every turn. They purged 500,000 people from the Georgia rolls one Saturday night. That's just one Saturday night. Exact match. Every trick you can think, they pulled it out. Georgia is ground zero for voter suppression. And yet, in spite of that, Stacey Abrams came within 55,000 votes of winning out of 4 million, with Brian Kemp's hand clearly on the scale. The good news is since 2018, we've registered 750,000 new voters in this state. 49% of them are people of color, and 45% of them are under 30. And so when you look at Georgia, you are looking at the new South emerging. We are the tip of the spear. 30% of our electorate is African American. You can't say that about any of the other states. And I'm grateful for all of my other challengers, but none of them have the mix and the diversity that we have right now in Georgia. And as a result of that, we saw during the June 9th primary, record voter turnout on our side. The media was focused on the voter suppression, and that's real. But what got lost in that story, when you saw the long line and all the games that were being played, what got lost in that story was that we had record turnout. We surpassed the 2008 record when Barack Obama made history and beat Hillary Clinton. We had 1.3 million Democrats show up for the primary, less than 1 million Republicans. So the other side knows that the momentum is with us, the wind is at our back, which is why the legislature then tried to stop the Secretary of State from mailing out vote by mail applications in our state, because it was working too well on our side. So you will see us lean in on vote by mail, early voting, and then voting on the day of. That'll just be the culmination of this season. I want to agree with Representative Jim Clyburn, who said that we really need to think about it in this way, that October is voting month. And we need to get everybody in our circles to think of it in those ways. In fact, you need to start voting now, request your application now. But certainly that last month, we need to think of that as the period of voting and voting and getting everybody in your circle to vote. We have the numbers. The good news is we have the numbers, and we'll be working hard over the next few weeks to get our message out to make sure that our people show up. I will tell you that we've got 2 Senate races in Georgia. We're the only state where that's true. That's great news. That creates a certain kind of synergy But honestly, it has created also a certain amount of confusion because the races are different. John Ossoff is running in a kind of conventional race where he won the primary, and he's now running against David Perdue. I'm running in a primary, they call it the jungle primary. It's a kind of a free-for-all, and everybody will be on the ballot on November the 3rd. And you got to get 50% plus one to win. I'm going to work really hard to make that happen. But if it doesn't, we got to make sure that it's me and one of those other Republicans in the runoff. And so just in case, we're already raising money for the runoff. That's how we're going to win.
Thank you, Reverend Warnock. And I'd love to invite Mayor Pete to actually really close us out and just sort of help wrap all of this up. We're so thankful to you and Governor Dean, both of you, for actually joining this conversation and lending your really important voices to the conversation. And so I will leave it to you two to close us out.
Governor, you're on mute.
That's because I'm so old. I haven't gotten used to all this stuff yet. This internet stuff here. I'm going to defer to Pete. You've just finished running a great campaign, and hopefully you've got some more in you. But I just do want to say, Reverend, you've inspired me as you usually do. I thank you for this, and I really, really hope you're going to be taking the oath of office in January and filling that other Georgia seat.
Thanks, Governor, and I'll just echo that. I'm inspired, and Reverend, thank you for stepping forward with your moral leadership and your policy intellect at exactly the moment when it's needed. And to everybody on the call, look, we're living through this paradox where offices like this Senate seat have never mattered more, but there's not the kind of attention or oxygen that there should be going into those races, because it's hard to look away from what's going on in the presidential race, which is also so important, especially with the complexity of this runoff. That makes it challenging. It also means it's a unique across the entire map and across the country opportunity. And there is such power in the community of supporters on this call right now across the 9 weeks between now and Election Day. And you're right, it's really election month, election season, and if necessary, the runoff to follow. It could be incredibly powerful if each of you, you've already made the choice to be here, if each of you could use your networks, of course, contribute as you are able further, but also make sure that you're just drawing people in and making them aware both of the extraordinary candidate that we have in Reverend Warnock and the extraordinary opportunity we have in reclaiming this seat, because it is absolutely winnable. And winning this Senate seat in Georgia is the kind of thing that would send shockwaves through this country, perhaps even powerful enough to reunite Senate Republicans with their consciences. And at the same time, also deliver exactly the kind of leader who speaks to the future we could be building. I often talked on the campaign, I believe even more now, about how we could yet look back at this year as a good year, as bleak, almost apocalyptic as it has been to date. We could look at it as the year things started to turn around and the beginning of a deciding decade that would, as the Reverend says, make the 21st century one that was to America's credit just as much as the 20th. That's what we have a chance to do. That's why I'm thankful to everybody for being involved. And we're going to be staying close to this race because it's so, so important. Reverend, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we will leave you for the rest of your night. Thank you so much for joining. And we will be in touch. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.